more logs into this industry, more public lands into this industry, is that you will have more workers pulled into that industry, and the corporations will squeeze them even harder. So that's who starts to pay for the DeFazio and Wyden bills to increase logging on public lands. It also has impacts on families, communities, and other workers. If you have workers earning less, then your community, your family has less resources to work with. But there's another part to this. This industry is among the most unstable of all the industries in the United States. The blue line measures, for Oregon, the increase or decrease, so that the middle of the graph is a 0 over there. So it's the annual increase from one year to the next. And employment, it grows and it goes down and it goes up and it goes down. But the blue line is the average, the red line is the timber industry. It's a very unstable industry. And you have unstable prospects for your employment, for your family's income, for the amount of activity, the amount of resources you have in a community. That leads to these sorts of things. The experiment of the Northwest Forest Plan was a tremendous boon for social scientists, in that here you had a pretty drastic change in how resources were going to be managed over a very large area. The area is about the size of Indiana. And there was a great expectation. There were these beliefs that we had communities that were timber dependent, and if now you didn't have public timber coming into them, that dependency means that you collapse. You had expectations that there would be all kinds of wreck and ruin in these communities. And in fact, what the review by the National Research Council, panel of the National Research Council, found, looking over that literature, is it was just the opposite. That where you had a higher dependency on timber, you had more social problems. And this sort of brings all of this into the current nature of this debate, with the Obama administration and others starting to talk about income inequality. When you eliminate high-paying or upper-middle-class jobs, about 40, 50,000 of them, when you pay the remaining 25,000 workers a lot less than you ever did before, and you bust the unions, okay? You bust the leading labor organizations in this state, in this region, except for the Boeing folks, then this is what you get. So this looks at what's happened from workers in 1990 looking out to 2012 and what has happened to them. And it's just what we see across the rest of the United States. So this notion that the upper 1% is grabbing all of the money, that's somehow Wall Street and the west of us or the other 99, no, this is within the state of Oregon itself. Who else pays? Well, the economy as a whole pays. You don't hear it quite so much in the last year because people have been laughing at them. But the industry and the folks in the counties talk about how the timber industry is a special industry. That is to say, it is the industry that is the foundation, or another way they talk about it is that other industries sit on the shoulders of the timber industry because it is so important to this economy. Well, what we see is that the wood products industry as a percent of gross domestic product within the state has declined from what used to be above 10%, is now scraping along at about 1%. And if an industry really is the foundation for this state's economy and it has declined in importance that way, you would expect the entire economy to collapse. And in fact, as the Northwest Forest Plan was being developed, that's what we heard from timber industry economists. We heard that if you did not sell, and this is before the Endangered Species Committee, the God Squad, if you will, we heard the timber industry economists argue that if you did not log 44 sales on BLM lands, that half of the economy of the state of Oregon would collapse. It just is not so. And there's no reason to believe that it's going to be so. This chart tracks average stumpage prices, that is to say the average price of logs out in the forest, adjusted for inflation, so they're in $1982, from the 60s until 2011. And it's basically a straight line. You're over there around $100 to $200. There are two periods where you see a deviation from that. One is the late 1970s, and this is a period when we had inflation growing in this country at unprecedented levels. And the timber industry said, this is a really great deal, because we've convinced the Forest Service and the BLM to give us 3 years to log, so why don't we buy the timber sale now, wait our 3 years, inflation's gonna go up and we're gonna make money hand over fist. And they did for a very long time, until you had the Volcker response from the Federal Reserve that squashed inflation. And so, you know, somebody stuck the pin in the balloon and it all collapsed. The second deviation that you see here is the Northwest Forest Plan. And people who were believing that you know, the whole economy would collapse if you did not log on public lands really believed, you know, what they were drinking. And so they expected things to go all to hell. It didn't, and so we're back where we were. There is no reason to believe right now. It could be, you know, you can't really look around the corner to see what's going to happen. But right now, there's no reason for us to believe that this industry is going to take off and really be some magical, powerful force in Oregon's economy. That's in sharp contrast to amenities. Clean water, nice vistas, nice places to hike, and the like. What we find in America is that people increasingly move to where it's a good place to live. And that's an important change, because until about the 1960s, that was not the case. People moved to really crummy places because that's where the jobs were. But increasingly we see that this is what happens. And you can see for Oregon, especially Western Oregon, a lot of people move here, and they move here largely for a quality of life. Not everybody, not 100%, but it's a pretty powerful force. Research that was published just this last couple of weeks, did a survey of the top entrepreneurs, people that had started new businesses or were taken off like gangbusters. Americans live in cities, most economic activity takes place there, and they are there because of quality of life. Again, not 100%, but really a dominant influence. They are not there for tax breaks. They are not there for concessions made off of public lands. They are not there for anything else. They're there because that's where they wanted to live. Part of that is family, maybe it's church, maybe it's ethnic group that they want to live in, but a large part of it is natural resource amenities. One of the things that happens is that as you attract people to the state of Oregon, they invest in all sorts of things. So you have growth or robust economic activity across the economic spectrum. But one place where you do see it is within the outdoor recreation industry. And if you look at existing jobs, right now we have about 25, maybe 30,000 jobs in the timber industry. Within the outdoor recreation industry, we have 140,000 jobs. Of the new jobs, well, the Wyden bill sort of says that it might get about 1,600 new jobs. That's total over the next however many decades. It's not 16,000 each year. That's it. The outdoor recreation industry, however, is growing at about 7,000 per year, and that is through the last 5 years when we had a major recession. So this is an industry that actually can generate new jobs. The timber industry is not going to generate new jobs. And their history indicates that if they do generate new jobs today, they're going to try to squeeze some of those jobs out tomorrow.
Ernie, where's this one come from?
I beg your pardon?
Where's this study come from?
Where does this come from?
Yeah.
The outdoor recreation industry has a foundation, something like that, and they count their numbers.
Quick question.
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, you had 1,600 on your slide, but is it 16,000?
1,600. That's it.
1,600 only.
1,600.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
What was the total?
The DeFazio bill, in contrast, at most would be about 5,000 jobs. Okay, I'm sorry for misspeaking.
And the other question I had on that last one was, I know outdoor recreation jobs don't tend to pay a lot, but it sounds like timber industry jobs are coming down to be about equal with outdoor recreation jobs. Do you have any
I did
numbers on
not
that?
pay her to raise that. Right? Yeah, you know, you get into these debates and that's the first thing, well, wait a minute, we have timber, machine operators, you get paid $100,000, and in contrast, everybody that works in the recreation industry makes beds for under your minimum wage. That's just crap. You have people in the outdoor recreation industry that are designing new things. You know, you go out there in the summertime and you stand along Highway 58 or you stand alongside the road up the McKenzie, and what do you see? You see very expensive vehicles going up there. Well, somebody's got to make them. That's what this is all about, okay? And that industry right now, the timber industry, you know, their claim that on average they are, you know, off the top, that's gone. It's gone. Taxpayers. The industry would also like you to not remember what happened with taxes when the Northwest Forest Plan was adopted. In this, or at the time that it was adopted in the early 1990s, you had, actually before it was adopted, you had Washington, Oregon, California all had a timber harvest tax. Revenues going to support general public services. Oregon, the industry in Oregon in 1993 went to the legislature and said, oh, woe is me, you've got to get us out of this tax burden so that we can continue to generate all of these wonderful new jobs. And so the legislature initiated a process so they no longer pay a timber harvest tax, except for what they call a timber harvest tax, which is money that goes from the left pocket to the right pocket. It pays for enforcement of the Oregon Forest Practices Act. It pays for fighting some fires. It pays for some professors at Oregon State. It pays for the Oregon Forest Resources Institute, which is a public relations arm for the industry. Okay, those are the purple bars at the bottom. So in fact, you know, yeah, there's some timber harvest, harvest tax, but it doesn't pay for any public services. In contrast, the other two bars show what the industry would have paid in a timber harvest tax if it had been under the Washington system, green lines, or the California system, red lines. And by the way, last year California bumped their tax up. Right? They increased the tax, the timber harvest tax. And you see that it's a pretty sizable chunk of money. You're up around $40 million. What's important to this also is that the dotted line shows the percentage or the portion of the Washington tax that by statute goes to counties. So if we had a timber harvest tax that is comparable to the one that Washington has, in 2011 the counties would have received $40 million. So when they say that the only way that counties can get money is by cutting now on public lands, they're hoping that you forget, you know, that they reached into your pockets and they took money out of the pockets since 1993. And then there's everybody else. One of the things that happened with the DeFazio bill is it's got people to think about what happens if we privatize public lands and what would the industry pay for them. And it turns out that the analysis that they had done says that they would pay about $5,000 an acre. Right? This is for a bunch of land, you know, 1 million acres, 200,000 acres, whatever it's going to be, because they can't log it all at once. Some of them they're not going to log for 20, 25 years. So on average, they would pay about $5,000 an acre for it. That is the value of the timber to the industry. In contrast, we have research that's been done that indicates that the harm that the rest of us would realize whenever that logging would occur on lands that are important for the production of clean water or production of water at the right time. What does that mean? That means that big trees collect an awful lot of water from the fog. That water drops down onto the ground and goes into the shallow aquifer and ends up in the streams in the late summer. Or habitat for northern spotted owls. That loss on those acres would be about $20,000 per acre. Now, not all acres have those characteristics, but some of them do. And then this is the killer. This is carbon. Back in the 1990s, when we were talking about all of this, my recollection is, and the people I've talked to, is that nobody talked about carbon. But now we are. Research that was published December 2012 by researchers at Oregon State looked explicitly at the lands within the Northwest Forest Plan, and looked explicitly at the lands called the matrix, which is the lands under the forest plan that are open to logging. And basically what you have is they compared, let's conserve those lands with what we're doing now under the Northwest Forest Plan, or let's convert them to industrial logging where they would be logged every 60 years. The difference between those is a substantial amount of carbon that will be held onto the lands right now, or will be sequestered, will be brought into these lands. And if you look at the damage that, the way economists think about this is, well, what is the damage of each additional ton of carbon dioxide that goes into the atmosphere? And that damage from a process by about a dozen federal agencies looking at this,